So good afternoon. I am Anto and this is Monday Live. We get together every Monday to chat about how we're getting through the pandemic and try and figure out what's in the other side. Just a reminder, all the profiles are on mondaylive.org, which is our website for the whole sort of project here. And also that the views expressed are personal, not of any company or organizations. Please do post questions and comments on the chat and Q&A and complete the survey at the end. That will be really great, appreciated. And just a reminder that this slide deck and the links that's on this deck will be on mondaylive.org as well. So that's your sort of single place of resource. So today we'll have a chit chat about what's going on generally, and then really want to talk about schools and what's going on during the sort of the opening of schools, and specifically what role BAS has to play in the opening process. And we're really very keen to get your views, especially if you have experiences in schools. And here we're talking about K-12 as well as higher ed. So if you do have an opinion that you want to express, please just chime in on the chat or a Q&A, and then hopefully we can have a conversation. A few slides to share. I came across this morning. New York Times started, actually today was the first day, a newsletter about schools in coronavirus. And I thought this quote was kind of interesting. The problem with schooling is more systemic, but the angst is very personal. And I think that captures the sort of really what's going on there. Roger talks about face recognition and how Amazon is thinking about using malls. Jim Butler, really sort of interesting perspective about maybe engineering is a better sort of way of thinking about coronavirus rather than social engineering, as it were. John talking about REI. There's got, if any of you want a nice corporate head office, they have one. I don't know where it is, but so that's available. Mark talking about a number of things, a lot of this on retail. Therese talking about many things here. I've only just seen this, so can't absorb it all quickly. And Tracy talking about his favorite subject, fast food or restaurant chains.
Yeah, retail.
So, and retail, yes. So that's kind of the opener. Throw it to the group. What's going on? And anybody want to expound on the links on the slides?
You know, one of the things that I had in mind, that second story, was kind of on the positive side, is a little less to do with our control industry and more to do with the fact that industries are adjusting, right? So in that case, it was a simple example where a chain that never before had a drive-through now is implementing drive-through, right? Because they figured out that's a better way to keep customers coming back. So I've been noticing lately how many industries are adjusting one way or another to figure out how to survive and adapt in this whole thing here. So I'm glad to see that. It's kind of a positive, in my opinion. See more of that going on.
Yeah, just to throw in one about Bernardo actually introducing facial recognition. I can only remember a short while ago everybody throwing their hands in the air because the Chinese were doing it, and against the privacy rules, nobody would ever let their use facial recognition in the Western world, but it looks like they already are. And it'd be interesting when they implement it in Facebook's major buildings to see what their staff make of it all. But it claims obviously it can do registering and things like that to help out get through the whole thing with the corona registrations people are coming in and obviously beyond. And also the other one was just a throw in there with, something we talked about before, which was repurposing buildings, and Amazon obviously looking at Sears and JCPenney as a distribution type buildings.
And obviously there's this sort of art of facial recognition with people wearing masks.
Yeah.
Yeah, my iPhone doesn't like that much. I've entered my code in more in the last month or 2 months than I did in the previous 3 years, I think.
I'll stick the fingerprint.
There will be a time, believe it or not, beyond coronavirus when you're not wearing a mask, and still means that they will be introducing the facial recognition, which is quite interesting with the whole people's privacy rules and stuff.
Not a new term, but a term I'm now hearing more frequently is stranded assets. I was talking to Anto before we kind of went live here, which, it is buildings that have become or in danger of becoming undesirable for use or investment. And as this pandemic has continued, I don't think we really heard about that in the very beginning, but folks I've been talking to or whatever have had a couple real estate developers and REITs use that term. So kind of interesting that that's kind of incubating again.
I think stranded asset is actually broader than just buildings. If you think about the infrastructure, roads and bridges and stuff, in a way we've built those with the expectation of the behavior that's going to change. So there may actually be far broader consequences on that term, stranded asset.
It may be, but obviously I look at it from a building's perspective.
Yeah, so, yeah, of course.
Anyway, in the restaurant convenience store space, when they talk about stranded assets, they generally are talking about the equipment inside. So if a restaurant has to close, what do they do with all that kitchen equipment and everything inside? So they're pretty good about moving and shifting equipment around from location to location generally, but when you're closing 300 locations, you can't do that. Obviously, you can't absorb that. So you're back to kind of fire sale or virus sale, as the case may be.
Yeah, virus sale. I think I saw today that 20% of the Pizza Huts are going to be going through bankruptcy.
Yep, there's a lot of that going on.
Some of the ones that, while one of the other chains is trying to hire 20,000 people because they were more focused on delivery than the in-person restaurants, right? Yep. So interesting shifting of, repurposing of people, never mind spaces, right?
Well, and the thing people often forget about that part of the restaurant industry in particular is, you think of brands like McDonald's or Pizza Hut, and you think of these giant corporations, but ultimately it's a collection of small business owners, right, that are doing that. So it's kind of catching up with them one after another, and the ones that are surviving now are ones that were obviously a little bit financially better prepared for this kind of thing, or have made adjustments to their business in different ways. One of the things that's always interesting about brands like that is how strict they are about brand standards. And I'm starting to see where some of the owners are going kind of away from the brand standards and making adjustments to their business model that aren't necessarily consistent with maybe the exact menu items or things that they're selling. They're selling sports drinks and things like that aren't part of the normal brand standard that is approved. So
the colleges are challenged. They have assets, they have buildings and facilities ready and waiting for a enrollment load of X number of students, and here they are facing a fall semester with uncertainty as to how much they're going to fill, what the processes are, how the students will behave. We are waiting word on a 60-building campus to do remediation and commissioning on all of the buildings with an eye towards COVID remediation with air quality. And the school is still uncertain how many students are going to show. It's an amazing dilemma for them.
Brian Turner just made a comment, I think, in response to my comment about infrastructure. He points out that infrastructure in the US is 20 years behind anyway, so maybe it will just sort of fit our needs post-COVID.
Right.
Yeah. So should we move on to talk about schools? Again, and people in the audience, if you have some experience with schools, you want to be pulled into as a panelist here, please just chime in, just mention something on chat and I'll pull you in. Otherwise, what do we have ourselves within this group? What experience do we have?
Yeah, I'll start if you don't mind. For the call, did a little local research, not industry-wide. So I'm in Central Virginia in Albemarle County, and my son went to local schools and then went to JMU, which is a little further away. And so I thought I'd check into how both those schools are communicating. Right. One of the things I thought was interesting about Albemarle County, it's the first place, and so far the only place I've seen it. They have a whole section on HVAC, and they broke it down, what we're doing about outside air delivery. We're doubling it where possible. Places that were heavily outside air are going 100% flush all during the week for the entire time. They're increasing priority of known preventive maintenance. They're increasing MERV filter ratings on equipment where they can. So pressure drop is an issue, and they've looked at, there's some places they can't increase the MERV filter ratings. And they have ordered HEPA and ionization that they still don't have all of them in place. But they directly reference the ASHRAE guidelines that they're following. So I thought that was interesting. It was, it was very clear. I did similar searching for James Madison University, and they had more information around how they're dealing with the population, the students, the testing, the moving in. They've reserved dormitories. If people get sick, you're going to be, sent there for quarantine, or if you need to be quarantined, they've got a whole stage. But I could not, and again, not exhaustive, I could not find any similar information on how they're handling the HVAC. So they were communicating more about the person side, and Albemarle County was communicating about that, but also pretty extensive, I thought, very competent information around what they're doing with their facilities. And the other point I make about it, they're planning to go back with only limited number of students allowed to even go in the building. They're doing some type of system where they're, coming up with groups of 10 that need to work with a teacher or whatever. And then they're going to look at, milestones along the way as they go through the fall to bring back up to phase 5, which is primarily back full in-person learning for people who want it. They're still allowing the option for people to not, to do it virtual. So that's just a little bit from the local area that I saw in prep for the call.
And Scott, you mentioned in an email about your wife's school. I'm not sure if your wife is a teacher or.
Yeah, my wife is a librarian at my son's former K-8 school, and they're following the ASHRAE guidelines as best that they can. And they've upgraded all of their filtration systems. They've adjusted their outside airs. They've ramped up, some of the fans where they can on the rooftop units to account for the pressure drop. All of the various things that are outlined in the ASHRAE guidelines. Now, I can't speak for all of Douglas County, but my son did start his first day of freshman school. The high school, I can literally look out my window and see it from my window. It's interesting. They're doing freshman orientation today, and their first day of actual classes starts tomorrow. And they're doing a Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday track, and everyone has off on Fridays. And that's when they intend to do a deep clean and sterilization of the building from the students being there for 4 days. So good stuff.
It's been interesting. I've seen stories on both sides of things where I think today there's a national story about schools, or a school in Maine that was not returning because their HVAC system and ventilation hadn't been upgraded to what it needed to be. And then there have been stories about schools that are returning because they have taken the steps similar to what John and Scott both have outlined. So it does, you know, whereas if you look back 2 months when we were talking about this subject, we weren't hearing anything in regards to HVAC in buildings and how their role in buildings in general. And now all of a sudden it's kind of a central theme through a number of news stories that we're seeing.
And back in July, I had brought up of what Rice University was doing, which was they have built by now 9 outdoor structures for in-person classes and activities to address the whole COVID type of thing. So here they've gone outside, and these aren't small little classrooms. They're huge circus tent type facilities. And so I thought that was kind of interesting how their approach was.
You know, some of the things that I hear you guys talking about are short-term and easy to implement kinds of fixes, and others are kind of long-term permanent investments. Is anyone else seeing more and more of a trend towards those longer-term, bigger investments, ionization and things like that into the systems? Is that anyone out there, or even, you know, people who are listening, are any of the schools making investments in those kinds of platforms?
So Tracy, I'll take just a quick pass at this. I don't know. I'm going to do the research and find out. But in Douglas County, Colorado, we've gone 12 plus years without passing a bond, and they just passed a bond last year. So all that money has already been earmarked for other improvements. So it's going to be interesting to see, are they going to reallocate those funds, or are they going to make an attempt to pass now another bond in consecutive years, knowing that it took them 12 years to get this one passed? So it's going to be very interesting to see the priority that's placed on this and how they move forward. I'll let you guys know next week what I come up with.
Is there a cry from the parents really about this? I mean, you'll go back to the 20th century. I think in the US, wasn't air conditioning voted the invention of the century, and obviously controls are part of that. And since it was introduced, more southern state sort of leaders have come out than ever before because of the schools. People could go to school and actually get air conditioning. But aren't the parents actually the ones that could be putting pressure on the schools now to ensure that the conditions are right and the protections in place?
Well, there's certainly a lot of parent protest. I don't know if there is enough knowledge base to be specific about some of our aspects of it. But there's a lot of, I mean, it's both sides. You got parents protesting, and this is just in Arizona where I am, parents protesting to open the schools and parents protesting not to, right? So there's so much noise going on with that sort of level. I'm not sure anyone is getting good advice. I'm watching Rick LeBlanc put on about programs for integrators to finance things and educational and guidelines that they can do. And I'm not hearing much of that specifically going on. Most of our school openings are being guided by, the numbers of test cases and so forth going on, and as opposed to how well has the school implemented, CDC guidelines or ASHRAE guidelines or anything like that right now still.
So Douglas County surveyed the parents. 84% of the parents responded that they wanted their children to attend 5 days in person. However, I'll also note that our COVID diagnosis is almost at 0. I mean, it's in the single digits in Douglas County, Colorado.
I think most of them don't want them to go back to school because they can't stand being at home with the kids anymore. They just want to actually
so
get back to school.
Carol asked a question about air-conditioned schools versus presumably non-air conditioned. Does anybody know the percentage of schools that are air-conditioned and versus not? No, is it?
I don't know that, but it did occur to me that, you know, I mentioned the story about the Maine school, and I'm guessing that a great deal of the schools in Maine are not air conditioned.
Right.
I grew up there, and I know where I grew up, there was no air conditioning. So we had air turnover in the winter, lots of it, but not in the shoulder months, you know, not in the fall and the springs time.
So Anto, I just posted a link to an Ed Week article that was posted in early June. It said the feds have estimated over 36,000 schools do not have adequate HVAC systems in place to deal with this problem. So it's a big deal, clearly.
Yeah. I'll pull in Brian Turner. Brian, I'll pull you in as a panelist, and also Keith Gibson. I know that he's doing a lot of work in California, so I'll pull him in, and maybe the two of them can add some perspective. Hey, Brian, how goes it?
Hey guys, how are you?
All good.
Brian.
Good.
Tell us your experiences recently in the midst of the school stuff.
Yeah, so, you know, I just posted that, you know, our schools are in two different states, and in the older cities that have schools that were built, let's just say pre-80, 1980, most of them were built without air conditioning unless they were in the valley or in Southern California where it's hot more often. But in Northern California, where I live, many schools don't have air conditioning. The newest schools do, let's say built since 2000, they've definitely got air conditioning. But like my daughter's school, just now, their first school, the K through 6, they just got air conditioning this year. And it was just installed, literally completed this month. But of course, no kid is in school today in California. Everybody is remote. My wife's school classroom, she's a TK teacher. When she went to school just to get her stuff and, you know, create material for her students, she noticed that they have an IQ Air portable unit in every single classroom in her district. But, you know, many of these schools don't have economizers, or at least not functional economizers. You know, and many of them just lock them out. You know, because it was, especially in the valley where it would get very hot. This week we happen to be dealing with record heat wave coming through. It was, I think, 113 on Sunday here in the Bay Area, which is insane. I think yesterday they recorded 130 degrees in Death Valley. Again, insane. Well, San Francisco was 74. So we're just having these huge temperature swings across the state, and of course now we're going to be dealing with some, you know, blackouts. You know, not necessarily planned, but potentially weather created blackouts. That it's really going to challenge remote learning, right? Because you have students all working from home, and yet we're going to have planned blackouts of our homes, and then we've got teachers teaching from home as well. So it's really interesting to see what's happening today. I think our schools in California will be prepared with the air quality, since most of them won't be going back until November or maybe even January. So they've got a little bit of extra time versus the schools in the rest of the country that are trying to, you know, have kids back in class immediately. I have one other piece from Oregon. My daughter just graduated from the University of Oregon, and so they're still, I still get feedback from what they're doing. And while they are not doing in-person instruction and most of their classes, they did still ask that all their students come back, at least to the region. So they're still instructing remotely, but definitely trying to still create as many experiences as they can for their students. I heard the same thing with San Diego State. They encouraged a lot of the kids to come back, and I know all of their dorms were changed to one-person rooms. So, nobody has roommates. And they also, unfortunately, I think for second year students, if they were planning to have on-campus housing, they eliminated all housing except for freshmen. So I think schools are definitely still trying to create the environment of, especially in the colleges, of creating college experience as much as they can while starting the years off remote.
What I hear is mostly about HVAC upgrades, filters, increased airflow. I'm wondering if anyone has heard of or participated in any kind of more sophisticated building automation system improvements to address the increased energy consumption that will likely result from these improvements. Stuff like, demand control ventilation. Has anyone heard anything about that being implemented?
So
We did see one major school district went ahead deploying analytics across a really large city, and that had been in discussion with them for a considerable period of time. And so I think that's part of that. It wasn't control specific, but it was analyzing the controls, detecting faults, being able to track fresh air. All of those things ended up on the list of goals that had been, talked about for a couple of years with the school district, but they went ahead about 2 months ago. That's the only evidence I have.
One of the largest school districts here in the Phoenix area, Mesa Schools, has demand control ventilation implemented, but they did that for other reasons long before COVID came along.
So Keith is with us. Can you tell us what's going on in Southern California with the project you're working on school-wise? You're on mute. You're muted. You're still muted.
All right, here we go. Yeah, hi everybody. I'm actually at the university this morning. They just turned all their buildings back up today. As a matter of fact, they've been kind of minimal operations since February. I haven't seen any mechanical upgrades with the customers I'm working with, but what I have seen is the upgraded, MERV filters, MERV 14, etc. But that's been limited to places where that's been limited to buildings where the HVAC and AHUs can handle the increased static pressure, drop across the additional filters. So they've been doing, I know they're also doing early morning purge and night purge of the buildings. But aside from that, and also I heard somebody mention that I have seen the spot indoor air quality units in a lot of the classrooms and laboratories and stuff. So, but they're roaring back to life. I mean, there's an IT pickup line behind me where students are coming to pick up their devices and stuff, and I think they're going to have some limited participation. They're planning on it at least. And then also I heard another comment earlier about how businesses are adopting to this COVID-19 pandemic. Picked up a new TV at Best Buy, went online, bought it, got a number on my phone, like a reservation number, drove to my local Best Buy in Long Beach, and they had a line, and I just pulled up to the warehouse, and I opened up the rear trunk of the SUV, and they loaded it right on in there, and we just took right off. So, I mean, man, the convenience factor that these businesses are, revamping their way of customer service and engaging customers. I mean, that was the easiest way I've ever purchased a TV. I mean, I didn't have to touch it. I didn't have to talk to anybody. I didn't have to do anything. I literally just pulled up, showed the guy my iPhone through my window, and I opened up the end, and they just loaded it up, and we were off and going. It was like a drive-through pickup. So yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I'm kind of hoping some of those things stick around after. It has been nice to be able to do that kind of a thing, for sure.
Yeah, although there's some pleasure in just walking up and down, touching all the TVs and twiddling all the knobs, right?
Yeah, different motivations for sure.
Well, I actually did go into the store before that, though. And actually, we did walk around. My wife and I did walk around and fiddle with the TV and stuff. And then but they didn't have the TV available at that particular site we went to. So we went to, like, you know, the Torrance store, but they had it at the Long Beach store. And so, yeah, 2 hours later, I went to another Best Buy and picked up the TV. But yeah, I did actually get the experience of walking through and looking at the different pictures, qualities and stuff like that. So yeah, it was kind of a, you know, hybrid engagement. So they would only allow like 20 people in the store at once. But yeah, I didn't just.
Well, this kind of thing drives innovation. We got in Europe here, they got startups now where you couldn't even get a delivery of food from a supermarket or anything. And so there's just virtual guys starting up and pulling deliveries together from smaller stores and then delivering it to your house, you know, where you can't get on with the bigger ones because there's no slots left. There's just guys doing it virtually with a number of smaller stores.
Going local.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Interesting angle. Any other sort of great report from the field, Keith? Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
You can be our field reporter in the future.
Yeah.
Now let's go
coming
to live.
Yeah, that's right. Live at Cal State University, right?
Yeah.
In the field.
We
So
a little of that.
So Jim Lee, I know that you have a lot of experience with higher ed mostly, and you've been opining over the past 2 or 3 years about what's happening there, and this is accelerating that. Are you sort of seeing confirmation signals of that?
Yeah, we lost our first 17-year customer, higher ed customer, to COVID downsizing and sort of direct abrogation of contracts. I won't mention who it is, but we're seeing definite pressure amongst the smaller schools, people that were already potentially struggling. It's no secret that the entire business model for higher education is broken now, but this was the first one to drop. I expect a few others. But generally speaking, business-wise, most of the customers are hanging in. I also have a son at college now and a son in high school. And in high school, he goes to the Boston Public Schools. He goes to the oldest school in the United States, which was started in 1635. And as far as I can tell, that's the last time they renovated. Actually, they renovated around 1912 when the building was built. But there's definitely no air conditioning, and I think they're just planning on opening the windows. School is going to be virtual, mostly here in Boston, although they're, they were supposed to have the plans done last week, but it changes daily. So we really don't know what's going to happen. But if I look at older inner city school systems, the condition of the buildings are appalling, and opening the windows is as good as it's going to get. In terms of higher ed, we think that the sophisticated large research universities are making some changes in their buildings and have been very interested in exploring air change rates, et cetera. But we have yet to see large investments in anything other than filtration. So there's been a lot of talk about ionization and UV. And, even with the COVID crisis, it still appears to be just talk. We don't see a lot of movement there. But filtration, we do see people upgrading filters.
That seems to be a budget issue. That's what's been happening here. There's a local news story, one of the school districts going on about how much money they've spent on preparing to bring students back. And then they put up a laundry list of all of the monies that they spent. And every bit of it was in PPE or some kind of support for PPE, like trash cans, for instance. They had to buy a pile of trash cans to handle all of the throwaway PPE that's going to be produced. And nobody has budgets, it seems, in schools for these kinds of investments. That's why I was curious about it earlier.
Just kind of, Rick, I see Rick just brought up something. I mean, it kind of brings it back to the fact that maybe this is an opportunity for a SaaS model where, you know, because they haven't got the capital at the moment, someone could invest and then be paying off and kept their systems up to date forever and a day under a SaaS type model.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of bond.
Yeah.
So back to the schools, especially the K through 12 schools. Question for the group: do you think most of the kids' parents have any idea about the systems, the ventilation, the indoor air quality, and so forth and so on that we as an industry know? But do they have enough knowledge to even know about it and ask their school systems, their school administrators, are you doing anything to address those?
I can't imagine so. I mean, I was flabbergasted when Scott was telling us that his wife, a librarian, actually, you know, speaks about ASHRAE. I mean, those two are completely disconnected.
Well, she gets inundated by it. You know, that's a lot of my conversation, Anto, is revolving around that right now.
It's exciting around your house, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of an evening.
And I'd like to think maybe I had a little bit of influence with the principal and the governing board at her school in taking action, because it's a charter school. So they get to pull their own levers and do their own things outside of the, you know, Douglas County school system. So
I see Carol responded. I think she agrees with my inclination that parents have no clue at all.
Mark, I think it's very similar to the HVAC in the commercial office space, right? How many tenants know what they could ask for from their building owners?
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the same. I mean, over and over, we find that tenants don't realize, you know, they say, hey, we're hot, we're cold, we're uncomfortable, we don't think we're getting airflow. And the answer is, you know, in California, we follow Title 24. Okay, that's the response they get, and that's supposed to close the conversation. And tenants don't even know, like, hey, can you give me a report that shows that I'm getting the proper air changes? They don't know what question to ask next. And I would say parents are in the same boat, you know, with schools. Unless they're in this industry, they have no idea.
I agree. And they see, again, what we've talked about on previous things, the visible side, the social distancing, the mask, and so forth and so on. And, again, they think, my school is addressing this. But obviously, as we know, since this is our business, there's much more that needs to be addressed.
But this is a common theme we've had, you know, almost throughout, is how to go out and educate the people that are outside of the industry with some of these things that are important. I mean, there's obviously schools, but every time we bring up a subject, it's always a matter of trying to get the information outside of our own industry so people are aware of it. And there's a greater need there somewhere.
My grandson is starting kindergarten, and in our county school systems, they are going virtual, and that was not did not sit that well for his mother and father. So they went out and actually found a kindergarten that they paying for. They are enrolling him. They have enrolled him. And part of that was to see what they're doing to address this and, you know, do all the protections. Beside the visible, this particular kindergarten did a lot with the HVAC systems and some of the things we've talked about, but not all. So, but they've decided to go find a school that is meeting those types of things.
So I'll go back to the link that Jim Butler put up on the slides, which is an article on Forbes that's sort of proposing the engineering solutions may be better than basically people solution. In other words, it's better to change the system rather than to try and persuade people that of their awareness. So we're kind of bouncing between those two extremes. And I don't know, anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think the people issue is so generally motivated or fueled, let's say, not motivated, by emotion and things of fear, right, and so forth, that, and when you add politically charged things going on behind the scenes, there's no right or wrong answer. There's no way to prove one way or another, as opposed to engineered systems. I think it's a little bit better in terms of black and white and getting things done and really moving forward. It could be a solution that is going on behind the scenes with everybody that really makes a difference here with some of this stuff.
I think Brian summed it up in the chat window. We need to make it cool, maybe a TikTok channel, right? We got to make our industry cool. People want to get involved and want to know about it and care about it. I think we've been trying that for a little while.
All right, Brian, you are now been appointed the official TikTok guy. So go for it, friend.
Brian, I don't have a TikTok account. I will open up one for you.
Yeah, I think Alper should actually start this. He's got to be the youngest one on the call.
Yeah, exactly right.
I think you have to do a bit of dancing on TikTok, right? So Alper.
Yeah. Heck, I'd pay to see Brian Turner dance. Come on.
I think one of the interesting things
about now, Mark, I'll share my profile with you.
Thank you, Fan.
I think one of the interesting things in that article was that the author pointed out that, COVID is just one of many viruses. We've been dealing with the flu for, I don't know, millennia, probably hundreds of years, certainly. And these viruses tend to mutate, and a strategy based on, for example, vaccines targeting a virus as the silver bullet is going to work probably about as well as it does with the flu. That is, we're going to be, running to try to come up with a new vaccine for the strain that we think is going to be out there in the next year. And solutions such as improved air quality through increased ventilation, better filtering, ionization, UVC, these types of things are expected to work across the spectrum of diseases without us having to guess as to which particular mutation of the virus is going to be prevalent. So it's not a complete solution. Clearly, we need therapies and vaccines. We need several different tools. Just as in cybersecurity, we need multiple layers of defense. And these sorts of engineered solutions, although they do require investment, can have some real staying power in terms of their value.
Jim, I'm going to further that point. Sorry, Roger, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
It's just going to further that. And I think you guys have already talked about this in previous weeks, but we are seeing a pretty big shift in commercial clients. I haven't really seen this in the schools yet, but away from energy-focused strategies to healthy air-focused strategies. And so we've also seen internal groups rename their group from energy management to something else. And sometimes it's called IAQ or health, healthy air or whatever, or healthy environment. But they're definitely trying to get away from energy being the primary focus. It's still in there. It's still certainly a second or third point of interest. But I think the air quality has climbed the ladder. And so from your point about investment, you want to just talk about existing infrastructure. We harp on this all the time. I know a lot of you probably have as well, but just fixing economizers and making sure they're operable. That has taken such a back seat in the age of energy focus. And I think because in so much of the country, the economizer is not necessarily an energy play. It's more of an indoor air quality play. And so I think that's going to be a big movement going forward.
I think your point, Brian, is that look, since the JLL 3300 thing, well-being has become more a word that's being used, around the place at the moment than anything else. And I think back to what Jim was saying, it's interesting that in some of the southern hemisphere places now, flu cases, through the winter are actually down because people are actually prevented because of the whole COVID thing. People are, washing their hands, wearing masks. It's just, in general, germs are not getting transmitted as easily. So there is a plus if some of this thing actually, helps with all the HVAC and just with general cleanliness. This may help with other things, as Jim was suggesting.
In Colorado, we have 5 or 6 major forest fires that are raging right now. I can look out my window and it's just a pure white haze. So increasing all of this outside air, what effect is that going to have on these buildings? Even though they're increasing the MERV filtration system as well, that smell is still going to come into the school. I can walk outside right now, and if I'm out there for 30 minutes and come back in, I smell like I was sitting next to a bonfire. So that indoor air quality is coming into question now as well with all of the fires that we're dealing with here in Colorado.
Although your background is actually quite blue and beautiful.
Yeah. It is.
Scott, is I-70 closed down between, outside of Denver going towards like Aspen in that way?
I haven't seen any of that, Tracy, but I don't watch the news, so.
I think it is. I mapped the distance there and it routed me up north. It was like 6 hours instead of 50 minutes or something.
Yeah.
So it's bad there.
It is.
And it is a good point. I mean, it's not unusual for us in Arizona, certain parts of Arizona, to have effects from California fires in a bad season, for instance. So.
But going back to the comments we made earlier about the normal sort of occupants of buildings not having any awareness of HVAC, in a way, we've kind of been wanting it to be like that, right? Because we've sort of been wanting to, that we've been, as an industry, we've been thinking that that's the best way to serve them, that they don't need to think about it, right? They just
think like that with proprietary protocols, Anto, as
well. But maybe that is changing, or maybe that needs to change, and maybe that then makes consumers more of an audience that we should care about. I don't know, there's kind of a shift there that I'm trying to pull out.
I've considered that one of the big problems of our industry all along is if people understood, just natively had a better understanding, right? If you run your car without oil, it's going to hurt you.
Right.
Okay. You just know that from life. You don't have to be an expert in automotive to know, we should probably change the oil in the vehicle. And if I don't change the tires, right, I'm going to have a blowout and crash, be stuck on the side of the road. People don't have any feeling for, well, none of the economizers work. So, you're breathing 100% recycled air or whatever, they just, people don't have, I think that's a big problem with our industry, and that I don't know whether it was intentional to keep people out of it. It's just a complex, unfortunately, topic that people don't really have the time for.
Right.
Although I'm not expert in this topic, but we are going into a new era because we are scared from this virus, and we are taking extreme hygiene measures. I have sent my son to kindergarten where they played outside, and I intentionally done it so that his immunity would be dealt with all the viruses and pathogens outside. I mean, it was the dirtiest kindergarten that you could find in the area. What is going to happen after we all do this with good intentions? I think I'm more scared of that than anything else.
And John, to your point, I think as an industry, if you look at it from a consumer's perspective, even going back to Brian's comment about the tenant or the occupant, we take for granted
that when we walk in a building, the systems are working. The temperature is pretty good, hot, cold, or whatever. I'm going to push a button on an elevator. I'm going to go up. I'm going to go whatever. So I think we've been predisposed to buildings and facilities, schools and whatnot, and we just take all this stuff for granted.
That sounds to me like if all of us volunteered time to go to the PTL, the Parent Teachers Organization, and did some education, because it's one thing to talk to the consultants and maybe some of the principals and facilities folks in the school districts. It's a very different thing to reach the parents, because to John's point, they have no awareness whatsoever of the HVAC, let alone probably little of it in their own house. The reason I stepped away is I just found out my entire AC system has failed and it's 7 years old and they can't get parts, and I got to replace both the air handler and the condensing unit for the low price of $7,000. So I'm a little pissed off right now. But putting that aside, the issue is real, is that we don't have any effective communications at the ground level to the users, the parents who are the advocates for the children, right? We don't do anything proactively to educate them, not just on energy, but on air quality, which is now the big issue. And we're in a position to do that. So the question is, how do we do that? So, and I think that's a missing element as an industry. We don't educate the users effectively about what we do.
But even higher ups, I heard Dr. Fauci, I think about 2 weeks ago, when he was asked about schools, and he suggested that schools just open all the windows. And then I sort of reflected back on the schools that my kids went to in Texas, and I don't remember seeing a single window anyway.
Well, and it's not going to happen in places like Arizona.
No, of course.
Or Maine in the wintertime, right?
Because they've been built as sort of hermetically sealed, that's kind of Alpa's point, sort of environments, which kind of feels good saying that, but and maybe it has to be that way, but that whole sort of discussion about whether that's good or bad is not even something that people talk about or think about.
It's a mess.
So how are the schools in the UK, if you know, Roger?
They kind of went from the not being at school for the COVID break straight into the summer holidays, which means that nobody's actually going back. They put them back in temporary, but most of the lower schools they don't have air conditioning. They just have radiators for the winter, and that only gets turned on sort of late October and turned off sort of late March kind of things. But universities and others are doing that, and all universities are going to be going back in sort of September. But I'm not convinced, just as you guys are, that they actually know what they're going to be doing when they turn them back on. So I think the whole across Europe at the moment is kind of September's going to be a scramble for people going back, but I'm not sure they would have done anything to actually prepare themselves for when they do go back. Going back to Alpa's point earlier, I can remember when I was a kid, my parents used to send me to parties where someone had chicken pox or mumps so that I got it and get out with it.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when he was talking about that.
You're on mute, John.
The problem is now the kid will be fine. I'll come home and kill the parents. So, a little different, right? We had immunity to chickenpox. We wanted to get it into our kids, right? So a little different this time. Talking about the idea of, boy, your kids will kill you. I think that has a whole new meaning now.
Back to Jim Butler's conversation earlier about this vaccine. I read an article this morning. I think the fastest produced and commercially available vaccine was mumps, and it took 4 years for that vaccine to hit the public. So people that are waiting around for this vaccine to mysteriously or magically get approved and be readily available have a significant wait yet in front of them.
Yeah, I think the latter part's the real issue, readily available. right?
Yep. Yep.
Well, and I again, referring back to what Jim was talking about, you know, viruses are going to be here. It's not like the vaccine is going to eliminate the virus.
Right.
And, you know, I don't know if we're going to have a corona season in the future or, you know, what that's going to look like, but it's going to be an ongoing thing. And from what I've heard so far, most of the vaccines are not permanent, right? There's some time effectiveness to that. So it's going to take all of these solutions, again, referring to what he was saying, in this more balanced approach of a little of everything, I think, to stay on top of this. Even when we get quote unquote herd immunity, you know, I saw the latest survey out that 35% of people who were surveyed said they're not ready to take a vaccine still.
Yeah, that is disturbing.
Yeah, and then I think the numbers are similar or maybe even a little higher for flu, right? I know people who won't give their kids flu vaccinations, let alone some of the more serious ones. So, you know, this isn't going to go away. There's going to be a place for it. It's not going to be a polio or, you know, some of these things where we were able to eradicate it because virtually everybody got vaccinated. So it's just, I don't think that will happen. So it's going to take solutions like we're talking about to balance this out.
Okay, so on that note, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Anybody want any last comment before we close up? No, I think we're good. I think we're good. Thank you very much. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Keith, for joining us, and thanks everybody. And this video will be up online later on this evening, and we'll see you next week. Bye all.
See you later.
Bye all.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Have a great week.
Like,